Hellmann, and I'm a PhD student in the Curriculum Studies and Teacher Education program at the University of Cincinnati. My presentation today is titled Alternative Teacher Certification Routes in Kentucky, a Critical Policy Issue Analysis. So an introduction or rationale for this project. I'm interested in working with pre-service teachers at the university setting, and really most of my research interests are typically associated with effective teacher education and preparation and pedagogy and best practices so that we can kind of best prepare our student teachers to go out into the field. There are tons of ways in which teachers can become certified nowadays, which is another reason that this topic of alternative teacher certification routes is interesting to me, especially given that I am a big proponent of university-based programs. And really, this has led me to research alternative teacher certification routes, specifically in Kentucky, which is where I teach and work, and then the implications that these routes have on our public schools. So, some tentative research questions that I use during this critical policy issue analysis was really, do I support alternative certification for teachers in Kentucky? And what can be done to ensure that these alternative teaching certification routes are reaching their full potential? And some secondary questions, what do I value as an educator? And do these values align with those that support alternative teacher certification routes? A theoretical or conceptual framework or lenses in which I'm looking at this issue is really from the perspective of both a K-12 public school teacher in Kentucky, which is what I am. I teach middle school English, and a PhD student. And although I do support university-based programs, just in full transparency, as I discuss my positionality, I've attempted to set that aside and to view this topic more objectively. So I've conducted a literature review and done quite a bit of reading and writing for this paper that I created or produced, and I'm really just looking at what this certification looks like in Kentucky, and specifically how things have changed over the years, the values underlying these policies, the inconsistencies, as well as drawbacks are highlighted in this paper. And given the nature of this critical policy issue analysis, I will be using a critical theory paradigm to look at this issue. So some background in history regarding this topic, looking at it from kind of a timeline over the years. It was really only during these 30 years between 1960 and 1990 that universities and colleges served as the main place, or really the only place, in which a teacher could become certified to teach public school. And it really wasn't until the mid 80s, early 90s, where there was an increase in those alternative programs that were not affiliated with universities and colleges. And by 2009, 59,000 teachers were certified through these programs. Lastly, jumping forward to 2018, and this trend has continued into 2020 and 2021, out of the 3.8 million public school teachers, approximately 18% had entered the field through alternative routes to certification programs. So the controversy, or why do people disagree upon whether alternative certification routes are viable options for our public school teachers? Generally speaking, alternative certification routes could be considered controversial because there are so many different ways that individuals could become certified, and I'll discuss that, I believe, on couple of the next slides. And these programs or routes are typically shorter, typically described as less rigorous, which points to some flaws or issues with effective preparation. And specific to Kentucky, the state ranks 45th in educational quality, and I believe it's a similar statistic for literacy and reading skills, which raises some additional red flags about teacher preparation. And it's worth noting that I don't think teacher preparation is, the sole cause of where our state ranks in educational quality. However, I think that could be a piece to the puzzle. And lastly, I provided this quote here from Zeichner that I thought was interesting, where it's really just looking at the neoliberal ideas and policies and deregulation and private versus public good that is seen in the world of our public schools today. And that same type of ideology is being implemented or seen often in our teacher education, specifically with alternative routes. So when I'm talking about alternative routes in Kentucky, I am really referring to these 8 routes that have been provided by Kentucky legislative findings. And these routes are exceptional work experience, local district training programs, college faculty, adjunct instructor, armed forces veterans, university-based alternative route, institute alternative routes, and Teach for America. And in my paper, I highlighted the 4 that I talked about the most, and those were the ones that I highlighted the most because I found them to be the most prevalent in Kentucky, and I wanted to focus more on the alternative routes that were not affiliated with universities in any way. So exceptional work experience, that is essentially referring to if you worked in a different field for a number of years and you wanted to go into the K-12 world and teach about that. So like, let's say you were in the business world for a while and then you wanted to go into the schools and teach economics or finance or something, that would be an example of exceptional work experience. Local district training programs, that's referring mainly to these programs within certain communities and schools and districts that train those that want to become teachers and work within their own communities. Armed forces veterans, that's referring to those who have served in the military for a number of years and then come back and want to have a job in education. They can do so in kind of a shortened program. And Teach for America, which I'm assuming those of you listening are familiar with this. Their affiliation with Kentucky is mostly in eastern Kentucky in the Appalachian area. So values. Those that support alternative certification routes, what do they value? Content knowledge and experience and learning on the job, teaching type practices are things that they value, which is kind of the opposite of what I'll maybe mention on the next slide. Community input and diversity among faculty and staff. This is a great thing, a great value. And here was a quote about Jefferson County, which is where Louisville is, which is actually where I went for my undergrad and did my student teaching. They had a goal of boosting its minority staff by 2%, which would mean that 18% of its teaching force would be comprised of teachers of color, which is a fantastic goal, and it should be much higher, right? Assisting veterans with their transition back, contributing positively to the teacher shortage in certain areas are good things. Maximizing learning for diverse students and inclusion was a big point of emphasis in all the readings that I did regarding alternative routes. And just about all of these routes are very quick certification processes. Some drawbacks. The lack of content-specific preparation is an example, and I know on the previous slide I had actually said content knowledge was a value, but I think in many cases there's a lack of content-specific preparation because in your university-based programs you typically choose a subject area and then you take classes about that content. So you take a bunch of English classes or history classes, which is not seen in some of the alternative routes. There's often a lack of pedagogical practices and research-based instruction. In your university-based programs, you take many classes about pedagogy on how and why we teach and kind of some best practices. And similar thoughts with lack of classroom management preparation. There's just not as many classes and experiences with that. And given responsibilities far too quickly in their own classrooms, and when I say that, in many of the alternative routes, they become the teacher of record very, very quickly with not a whole lot of preparation in many cases, which I find to be troubling. And this is just a quote that kind of supports that, saying, the more comprehensive preparation experiences that teachers have, they'll be more effective teachers and be more prepared than some of their other colleagues. So what is my stance? Do I support alternative certification in Kentucky? I would say yes, but there are some things that I would change or suggest, hypothetically, if I were given the opportunity. And what do I value as an educator? Pedagogy, content knowledge, diversity, inclusion, relationships, preparedness, and support are just some of the things on the short list that I value. And do these values of mine align with alternative certification routes, which is kind of another way of answering, do I support them? And some aspects do and some aspects don't, but I really believe that context plays a key role in all of this. And I've really learned that, I don't think these two programs have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can support university-based teacher education programs as well as alternative certification programs. But I really just think it depends on the context of the individual, the school, the demographics, a number of different things. So some policy suggestions I have. What could be done to ensure that these alternative routes are reaching their full potential? Consistency among programs and certification routes, I think, is a place to start. I think there's value in the flexibility of all of the routes. However, I do think that there should be some minimum requirements across the board. And reallocation of funding, I don't claim to be a finance guru or anything, but, putting money where it should be. And here's an example of something our commissioner stated regarding the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching, where they allocated $1 million per year to the state budget for educator quality and diversity through teacher recruitment and retention program with our alternative certification routes, which I think is great. Scholarships and additional support for aspiring teachers. I think there's often barriers that get in the way of some people going to become a teacher, especially with our university-based programs, so things like that could help compensate. And an emphasis on literacy skills, given our state's current position in rankings and whatnot, would be a good point of emphasis. And then giving more power to school-based and community-based groups to make the decisions for how teachers become certified, depending on the needs of the students in those communities. Because, who's to say what one school needs as opposed to another. Moving forward, maybe some unanswered questions or future studies. I think that more longitudinal data would be helpful. I think most of the readings that I completed, they looked at while they were in the program or that first year that they became a teacher. And I think it would be interesting to look, 5 years down the road. Are these teachers still teaching? Are they effective? How would you compare them to their counterparts that went to a more traditional program? And another question that came to mind was, how will this new administration with President Biden and Vice President Harris affect teacher education in Kentucky regarding policies and things of that nature? But at the end of the day, I really just want a nation of public schools filled with well-trained and caring teachers. And although I do plan to work with pre-service teachers in a more traditional university-based setting, analyzing these alternative routes has really broadened my understanding of teacher preparation, and I'm really glad I decided to look at this policy in more detail and look at it through kind of a critical lens, because over the last couple of months I've really found the good things and the bad things of both, and I think it's really interesting to see what is best for our future teachers in the state of Kentucky. And moving forward, I think there's many, many things that we can do to become a more educated state. But that is all I have, and thank you very much for listening. Here is my references page, and thank you very much.